Hello, my name's Sandy Rattray. I'm a resident of Chalcot Square and also a member of the Friends of Chalcot Square Gardens. And this is a short presentation to take you through a proposal to put hedges in the square, both around the perimeter and also behind the benches in the centre. And we have a questionnaire which we hope you'll be able to fill in to give us feedback on that. I'm going to trace the history of the square to give you a sense of what it looked like in the past. And the very first document that we have on this is from 1857, shortly after the houses in the square were completed, where the builder William Broder sold the gardens in the middle to a Catholic vicar, the very Reverend James O'Neill. The sale was subsequently reversed, but in the sale description in the deed, then it says that the square was fenced in with iron rails or fences. So that's right at the beginning of the square. We then move forwards. The first Ordnance Survey maps of London came out in 1870, and you can see quite clearly here the square with a perimeter hedge and four separate entrances to it at that time. Rolling forwards, to the next Ordnance Survey map in 1894, you can see that the layout is essentially the same with a perimeter hedge and the four entrances. And then moving forwards to 1928, there was a Royal Commission on London squares which investigated the state of many squares in London, including Chalcot Square, then called St George's Square. And you can see that in that document I've extracted a description that the square was an enclosure, almost square in shape and surrounded by a sparse hedge. We then go further forward in time and a photograph from 1968, so after the Second World War now. And you can see that we don't have a hedge anymore around the perimeter, and actually we don't have railings either. They were both removed at some point, the railings probably during the war. And indeed the square was used as air raid shelters. Trench shelters were constructed in the war, and so it was no doubt fairly significantly altered at that time. But then as a result of action by the local residents, you can see in 1977 the iron railings that we have today had been reinstated with a set of benches in the centre. And our proposal is to put back the hedges that were originally there. This is a little bit inspired by Chalcot Square in the city, which was redesigned a few years ago by Todd Longstaff Gowan, a garden designer who's probably the expert on the London Garden Square. And so this is how the Garden Square looked in May of this year. And you can see in particular that when you're entering the square, it's a sea of green. You're not seeing, in particular, cars around the perimeter of the square because there's a light hedge around it. This gives you another view, again covering up any of the street furniture and cars outside of the square. And this is a close-up of what the hedge looks like. You might call it a quickset hedge. A quickset hedge would be a light country hedge, particularly featuring hazel and hawthorn. And these would be species that are pretty robust. They're extremely good for biodiversity, and you could see many types of wildlife thriving in these hedges. Todd has kindly given us a sketch of how the square might look with these low hedges in place behind the central benches and around the perimeter. So this is looking at the square from the south side, from outside of the railings, which you can just see sort of peeking up at the on the bottom of the picture, and how it would give this similar sort of shielding effect if we had a quickset hedge of a similar variety to Chalcot Square. And finally, just to make it clear on a drawing, so the green lines here show where the hedges would be placed. In brief, some of the arguments that we've heard in favour in the Friends of Chalcot Square Garden Committee would be that the hedges will increase biodiversity, especially if they're of mixed planting, that they will hide the cars that you see very much, that the benches in the centre might be more comfortable to sit on if you feel protected by a hedge behind you, that they might discourage football playing, which many people find very disturbing when they're sitting in the square, and that we've noticed that older people have been using the square less as it's become rather dominated by children. Hedges might make the square a more comfortable place for older people and in fact all people to use. And then some of the arguments against, there may be issues with maintenance. We rely on Camden Council's contractors to maintain the gardens, that the hedges might provide opportunities for undesirable activities in the square, that the planting might not survive, the square might suffer from lack of rain, but also physical damage through the heavy use that the square receives. And then finally, that some people would prefer the aesthetic of a more open space. So that's a short presentation, and we really hope that you will let us know whether you're in favour of this suggestion or not in the questionnaire that we've sent out. We'll keep the responses confidential, but we particularly want to hear from people that live in the houses surrounding the square, and we will add up all the answers, and if we have more than 2/3 in favour, then we will go ahead and approach the council to see if we can put this in place. Thank you for listening.